We will cover several topics today to include a review of the Pasa eligibility criteria and guidance for IEP teams on making appropriate eligibility determinations. We will also review important information and updates regarding Pasa enrollment, training, and test administration. Additionally, we will review information pertaining to parent requests and Pasa score reports. LEAs should be aware that the 1% threshold justification requirements have been updated for the 2019-20 school year. We will review the new justification form required for LEAs who anticipate exceeding the threshold and the new process for submission to BSE. The intensive needs review process will also be reviewed today. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will be answering questions. If you have a question, please type your question into the chat box. Again, we have some time set aside at the end of the presentation in which we will go over the questions in the chat box. If you have additional or more in-depth questions that you would like to ask us, you can certainly email Linda and myself at any time throughout the school year. Our email addresses and contact information are included at the end of the presentation in the contact slides. Next, we'll talk about Pasa eligibility criteria. Only students with the most significant cognitive disabilities who meet Pennsylvania's 6 eligibility criteria are eligible to participate in the state alternate assessment, or the Pasa. That determination is made by the student's IEP team. We will talk more in detail later in the presentation regarding the 1% threshold and related requirements. ESSA regulations continue to stipulate no more than 1% of the state's total tested population can participate in the Pasa. The BSE released the updated Pasa eligibility criteria last school year for use and determination of eligibility in the 2019 Pasa. IEP teams again must answer yes to all 6 eligibility criteria in order for a student to be eligible to participate in the alternate. The decision must be documented accordingly in the student's IEP. In addition to the updated criteria, the BSE released a resource tool for IEP teams last year called the Pasa Eligibility Decision-Making Companion Tool. The resource outlines each of the 6 criteria and additional considerations to provide clarity and specifics. The resource tool can be accessed on the PDE, Patent, and Pasa websites, and a link is provided on this slide for the Pasa Eligibility Decision-Making Companion Tool for IEP teams. Again, this is the document IEP teams should use in determining if a student is or is not eligible to participate in the Pasa. In addition to the updated Pasa eligibility and Pasa eligibility criteria decision-making companion tool, the IEP document was also updated to include the 6 eligibility criteria. The purpose of adding the eligibility criteria is to ensure that parents are informed of the requirements associated with participation in the Pasa and that more robust discussions occur when this portion of the IEP is reviewed at annual IEP team meetings. Of note, the IEP will contain language associated with the eligibility criteria. For example, information associated with details of the significant cognitive disability, instruction aligned to alternate eligible content, and impact to learning across school and community settings. Also, the specific accommodations that the student will require for participation in the Pasa must also be included on the IEP document. This slide shows the Pasa Eligibility Decision-Making Companion Tool publication. Although the full graphic is difficult to see on this slide, we will review each of the criteria and additional considerations on the subsequent slides. Publication requests for color copies of the companion tool can be made directly to Patent. Each of the criteria are numbered and bolded in the following slides. Additional considerations are listed for each to provide further information for teams. The first criteria determines if the student is in a tested grade level. Note the importance of ensuring the student's grade level reported in PIMS, and the Pasa digital system must be an accurate match. Later in the presentation, we will discuss further the importance of ensuring this data is correct. Criteria 2. Note that PA defines a significant cognitive disability to include the language of pervasive and global in nature, affecting student learning in all academic content areas, as well as adaptive behaviors and functional skills across life domains. This is important for teams in the decision-making process, as it gives more detail in what a significant cognitive disability may look like. Prior to this definition, a team may have justified that a student who reads 3 to 4 grade levels below would have met the definition of a significant cognitive disability. The language clearly indicates that the student would have significant global delays across life domains, including adaptive behavior. As you will see in the highlighted and the additional considerations, the definition of a significant cognitive disability does not directly correlate with a specific disability category or label. However, there are some Chapter 14 primary disability categories that you would not expect a student taking the PASA to be identified with. Specific learning disability and speech only would be 2 examples of disability categories that you would not expect a student who takes the PASA to be identified with. Additionally, emotional disturbance would also not be an expected disability category associated with the PASA. The third criteria references the type of instruction the student requires. The student's instruction should encompass more than just academics. A student eligible to participate in the PASA would be expected to receive direct and repeated instruction to include not only academic, but functional and adaptive behavior skills as well. It is expected that the student would require repeated instruction in these areas in order to generalize skills across multiple settings, such as the classroom, community, and home. Criteria 4 regards extensive adaptations and supports. Note, the additional consideration mentions that the student would be expected to require intensive and ongoing supports after graduation. Typically, these students may have or plan to have involvement with agencies that may support independent living goals. Criteria 5 references substantial modifications to the general education curriculum. It is expected that most students who participate in the PASA are taught using the alternate eligible content aligned to grade level standards. Eligibility criteria number 6 includes the regulation that measurable annual goals and short-term objectives must be included in the IEP for students who take the PASA. LEA should note this is one of the areas addressed in a cyclical monitoring file review. In addition, the PASA eligibility criteria incorporates considerations for what determinations are not based upon. The decision cannot be based upon the student's IQ score or disability alone. For example, not all students with an intellectual disability will qualify for the alternate assessment. The decision cannot be based upon English learner status, poor attendance, expected poor performance on the general assessments, low reading or achievement levels, anticipated disruptive behaviors, or emotional distress. It is also important that administrators are aware the decision to qualify a student for PASA is not an administrative decision, and it cannot be based on how they feel the student's score may impact their accountability data. Again, the decision for a student to participate in the PASA must be made by the IEP team. The answer must be yes to all 6 criteria in order for the student to qualify. Please note it is not permissible for a student to participate in the PASA for one tested subject area only, and the PSSA or Keystone for another in the same testing year. If the student meets the criteria to participate in the PASA, they must qualify to take the PASA in all tested subject areas, as the participation requirements encompass significant global delays.
Good morning. Thank you, Lisa. This is Linda Lupp. Next, we'll begin the section pertaining to PASA enrollment, training, and test security. It is important for a PASA assessment coordinator to be identified for all LEAs and service providers who administer the PASA, as the role of the PASA AC encompasses many different functions. The PASA AC receives all the communications from the PASA vendor regarding enrollment, training, test administration, and score reporting details. The PASA AC is responsible for ensuring that the procedures associated with administration and enrollment are followed. The PASA AC may be required to also communicate with the Bureau of Special Education or the test vendor on behalf of that agency. Therefore, having a PASA AC manage communications to the test vendor or to the Bureau of Special Education actually streamlines and makes communication much more efficient. Often the test vendor and the Bureau of Special Education receive emails from teachers asking if the assessment window may be extended or if a student must take the test. These are things for which someone within the LEA or the service provider should be aware and would also most likely want to answer themselves. Therefore, it is recommended that the PASA AC be an individual with decision-making authority and understanding of special education programs for the LEA or the service provider, such as a special education administrator. Again, the PASA AC should serve as the primary contact to PDE or to Patent or the vendor. If the Director of Special Education or the Special Education Administrator is not serving as the PASA AC, they may, however, be added into the digital system in order to receive email notifications from the vendor. It is important that contact information is updated annually in the PASA digital system. So we also recommend that you ensure your firewall does not prevent the receipt of communication from the vendor. Each year, we encounter a few individuals within a few agencies who miss important communications because of the strong firewalls within their IT department. Again, if there is a change in the assigned PASA AC for your agency since last school year, please ensure this information is updated in the PASA digital system, or important notices will be missed. You may contact the PASA vendor immediately to update the PASA AC assignment by emailing the vendor at pasatest@pitt.edu. All requests to update a PASA AC should be made to the vendor, as a BSC cannot update this information in the digital system. It is important to note that the PASA digital system will be opening for all PASA ACs on September 30th, along with enrollment. Therefore, in order to receive communications in advance of that, again, please reach out to the test vendor at the email address provided. State alternate assessment dates are always located on the Bureau of Special Education's website under Assessment, and also on the PASA digital website. As you will see, the enrollment window begins on September 30th. All other dates continue in a similar way as compared to prior years. As good practice, the Bureau of Special Education suggests that the special education administrators inform all relevant staff and parents of the PASA testing window. Letters containing the PSSA keystone dates are often provided to parents. So good practice would be to include providing the dates of the PASA testing window to parents and families as well. It's important to note that when planning communications to families, the PSSA testing window does not begin until April 20th. So if your agency would plan to notify parents of PASA test takers at the same time as parents of PSSA test takers, that opportunity may be missed because the PASA window begins prior to the PSSA. So if this is something that your agency will be doing, which is notifying families of the window, just please plan accordingly and examine the calendar carefully. This is new information, as you can see from the icon in the top right corner. Beginning this year, the Pasa enrollment system has been updated to allow users to mark a student as taking the PSSA or Keystone exam during the enrollment window. In prior years, the guidance was actually to enroll the student and then mark them as not assessed at the end of the testing window and note the reason. However, that required additional time and some confusion in the field. Now students can be more accurately accounted for in real time by marking them accordingly. Once a student is marked as taking the PSSA and Keystone exam in the digital system, that student or students will be immediately removed from the Pasa roster. This option can be marked for a student at any time instead of waiting until the end of the testing window. We hope that this will be more efficient for schools and for the Pasa AC. As mentioned, the Pasa digital enrollment window will close on November 15th per the calendar. Students who are newly identified or move into the district or the service provider after the end of the window may be enrolled by simply contacting the Pasa vendor directly through email. Any student, however, who should have been enrolled during the window and was not will be referred to the Bureau of Special Education for approval. The Pasa late enrollment request form will be required to be submitted to the Bureau of Special Ed by the Pasa assessment coordinator in these instances. This late enrollment procedure is to ensure that students are enrolled in a timely manner and that the Bureau of Special Education conduct reviews of preliminary enrollment data for accuracy and ensure that the appropriate amount of materials are produced. Although the Pasa rosters are loaded with students assessed the previous year, the following suggestions are provided to ensure students are not missed during the enrollment window. One suggestion is that the Pasa AC communicate with the special education teachers or assessors to ensure that they are aware of the opening of the Pasa enrollment window and that they review Section 4 of the IEPs to identify those students eligible for the Pasa and ensure accuracy of the eligibility. Teachers should work cooperatively with the Pasa AC to check caseloads, class rosters against the Pasa enrollment roster. Careful review should be given to the IEPs of third graders, 11th grade students, and students who may have moved in after last year's testing window, as they may need to be added to the enrollment roster. These are sometimes the individual students who are easily missed. The AC should also ensure students who were previously tested and moved out of the LEA are appropriately reflected on the enrollment roster, and students who are no longer eligible for the Pasa are unenrolled according to the slide that was given previously. Enrollment must be completed by the assessment coordinator and ensure that the Big Five, as outlined on this slide, are accurately reported for all students in the system and that the data matches the demographics and PIMS. During preparation of the LEA's accountability files in the spring, each student is matched against PIMS data on the data elements referred to as the Big Five. So the data must be accurate in order for the participation and performance to be attributed. This also includes ensuring that students serviced outside of the LEA are enrolled with accurate data. The following slides will further explain the importance of accurate student enrollment data. To clarify, the Big Five include P-Secure ID, first name, last name, grade, and date of birth. The next several slides are intended to help you understand better the importance of the accurate data, the origin of the pre-populated data in the Pasa system, and how it is used currently. Historically, schools used to enter all PASA data for all students every year. Schools asked if this process could be improved, and with the inception of the digital system, the vendor was able to begin the process where all student data was held over in the system for the following year. Then the following year, schools only needed to add new students or identify if a student was no longer receiving services at that location. Each year, the grade also advances. If data was initially entered incorrectly and never fixed, it could be perpetuated within the system. Additionally, regarding grading, if a student continues on in a grade the following year, the same as the prior year, the system would not know that, and the system would advance the student. So again, this would be another example of just being very careful and looking individually at the data. Bullet number 2 on the slide is that also the PSSA and Keystones data are matched to for accountability. So the PASA enrollment file is matched against the PIMS data, just like the PSSA and the Keystone exams. While some mismatched data can be verified during the attributions window through the eDirect Insight system, some data that is incorrect cannot be matched or corrected and will impact accountability negatively. This slide is intended to demonstrate how incorrect data could impact accountability. This example shows where common mistakes occur. Here are the big 5 that were previously mentioned. You will see a record from the PASA enrollment system and a record from the PIMS student enrollment template. As you see, the PA Secure ID, name, and grade are highlighted. PA Secure ID errors are often the result of mistyped or reversed digits, or the school may at one point enter a local student ID rather than the PA Secure ID into the digital system. If all other elements are accurate, a student may be typically located by school personnel during the attribution window if that person who's doing the attribution work searches appropriately for other similar PA Secure IDs. It is much like an auto correct. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. She advanced the slide for me. I apologize. Likewise, a mismatched name with all other data elements may provide some challenge during the attribution window. Again, school personnel reviewing the attributions will need to search for students with similar or familiar Big 5 data elements. Another common error pertains to the grade level. If in the past the PASA AC was not an administrator or may be unfamiliar with data systems, or the parent or the person did not understand when the IEP was developed, the grade on the cover page of the IEP or the student's current grade, it was possible that an incorrect grade may have been entered into the enrollment system of the PASA. Likewise, if a student was maintained at a grade level by the IEP team, it is possible that the grade level in the PIMS file and the PASA system are mismatched. For example, if PIMS identifies the student as grade 8, but the student took a grade 7 PASA test, the student's participation cannot be counted and accountability will be negatively affected. This is an error that cannot be fixed during the attributions window in the late spring, summer, after all testing has concluded. Therefore, it's very important to ensure the data is accurate now. In summary, having correct PASA enrollment data is important. All PASA enrollment data is matched to PIMS prior to the opening of the attributions window in the eDirect Insight system. Some PASA test records with incorrect data, as you heard, can be matched during the attributions window. However, other mismatched data can affect accountability, such as an incorrect grade level. Lastly, if a student was never entered into the PIMS data, and this has occurred, the student's test record cannot go forward into the attribution file in the Indirect Insight system. Rules dictate which agencies are responsible for entering data into PIMS. If a school district or charter school has students receiving their education outside of the district, it may be beneficial for the LEA to ensure that their students are entered into PIMS by the respective agencies. One must also consider students identified as English learners and PASA eligible. Accountability requirements associated with being an L have not changed, nor have the enrollment requirements in the digital system. English learners enrolled in a U.S. school for their first year are not required to take the reading ELA assessment. They are, however, required to participate in the math and science state assessments during the first year with accommodations as appropriate. The same guidelines apply to English learner students who meet the eligibility requirements to participate in the PASA. For more information on English learner participation in state assessments, please see the accommodation guidelines for English learners on the PDE website. Directions for enrollment for English language learner students in the PASA are as follows. PASA ACs must ensure that students identified as L and PASA eligible are enrolled properly. The PASA AC should enroll the student as they would if the student were taking the assessment. For the ELA test, when the testing window opens, the assessor would choose not assessed for ELA only in the drop-down menu, choosing first-year L student as the reason. This process would be completed during the testing window as the field is not available during enrollment. These directions are provided in the PASA AC enrollment training module and also PASA assessor test administration training. This training today does not replace the online training modules in the PASA digital system, which are required for PASA ACs and assessors. This leads us to the next slide. PASA ACs and assessors are required to complete all training modules and proficiency tests, review and acknowledge test security requirements, and review and acknowledge video consent forms. This information is not new and continues in the same manner as it has in prior years. As a reminder, like last school year, assessments will not be delivered to a digital inbox of the assessor until training and proficiency assessments are completed by the assessor and the PASA AC. It is important for the PASA AC to be aware of features within the digital system that will help them to analyze and ensure accuracy of data. The data downloads feature is going to be restructured in the PASA digital system this school year to allow for easier access for the LEA and service providers to review data in real time and access reports. Later in the presentation, we will demonstrate the downloads page on the PASA digital website. The test security process is similar to that of the PSSA and Keystone exams. A test security module for training is provided online to all PASA ACs and assessors. Information on test security is provided in the PASA Test Administration Manual, as well as the handbook for assessment coordinators. And test security affidavits are signed electronically before materials are released. Test security includes returning all printed tests to the assessment vendor, removal of the assessment download from the computer cache, returning videos if any exist, and ensuring videos are removed from the computer after upload. Concerns regarding test security may always be reported to the Department of Education, Bureau of Special Education, and specifically to Lisa Hampy, who's on this presentation today, at the email address provided at the conclusion of the PowerPoint. There are some recommendations that we can provide for managing student assessment materials. All test kits and student materials should be inventoried by the AEC upon arrival. Any materials that you do not receive should be reported to the vendor immediately, and it's recommended that you maintain a record of your communications should any further follow-up occur. At the conclusion of the test window, inventory all the returned materials from the assessors, return materials using the provided labels, and maintain records of your transactions. By note, the Pasa AC can also see in the digital system if an assessor has downloaded an assessment. While training provides directions on how to manage the downloads, the Pasa AC should ensure that downloaded assessments are managed accordingly. This slide is provided to ensure all Pasa ACs and assessors are clear on the management of the downloaded assessments tab within the Pasa digital system. The download tab within the test administration window is intended for situations in which the assessor needs to print a test. If a test does not need to be printed, there is actually a preview tab that the assessor may click on, which allows him or her to simply look and view at the test without downloading or printing. If the test is downloaded and printed, the printed copy should be returned to the Pasa vendor with the other student materials. If the test is downloaded and not printed, the computer cache should just be cleared to ensure that the test is not saved on the computer. This is to ensure test security. As mentioned on the prior slide, the Pasa AC has the ability to identify which assessor may have downloaded an assessment and work accordingly with the assessor to assist in managing the download. Next, we'll talk further about test administration. Again, this is new information contained on this slide based on the icon in the corner, starting in the 2019-2020 test. So this Pasa test administration cycle, all Pasa items will be delivered just using one scripted prompt instead of two. The extra prompt language that was previously included in items was removed. Advantages to using one prompt, or in short, if you're not as familiar with the test, it's the question that's asked to the student. So instead of providing two opportunities or two questions or two prompts, it has been reduced to one. Again, advantages to using one prompt include reducing frustration for a student who might believe his or her first answer is correct, but is then prompted to answer again. It also reduces time on the test, which has been a priority of the Secretary of Education. Any specific directions on actually administering the test using one scripted prompt will be included in the Pasa digital training modules for assessors this year. Last school year, the Pasa moved from 3 levels of testing in ELA and math to 2 tiers only for all content areas. So all Pasa assessments consist of 2 levels of cognitive difficulty. Tier 1 is the lower level of complexity with simpler words, phrases, shortened sentences, and simple picture supports. Tier 2 is a higher level of complexity with sentences and picture supports. It's important to note, and this is not new, but we feel it's imperative to just reiterate that both tiers are intended to be read aloud to students. There is no requirement for independent reading on any grade level or tier of the PASA. Similar to last school year, students are placed into the appropriate tier for ELA and math based upon their performance level assessed in the prior year. Students who are newly enrolled into the PASA will be placed by the assessor using their knowledge of the students and by also reviewing the guidelines associated with each tier, tier 1 and tier 2. And the guidelines are descriptions about each tier that describe and provide characteristics about the items of each tier. Further information will be provided in the online PASA training modules regarding placement and selection into the tiers if you are a new student. The placement test for science was initiated last year for the first time and will remain in effect this year. Students will be administered 12 items at the beginning of the science assessment. Based on their performance on the first 12 items, the student will then be directed and placed into either a tier 1 or a tier 2 in order to continue the assessment. The PASA fully digital delivery platform provides the most efficient process for science placement testing. However, there are directions and steps available to assist the assessors who would not be using the full digital system for placement testing. It is important for the PASA AC and assessors to carefully read and review and understand placement test process and how it relates to the 3 delivery options so that the best option can be chosen and that the process can be as seamless as possible for the assessor and the student. A request for a tier change must be made by the PASA AC in the PASA digital system. The request must be individually made and should contain a valid reason. An example of a valid reason would be that a student has a medical condition or has had a significant change in his or her performance that may be impacting his abilities this school year, differing from how he or she was last school year. It's important to note that if making the request for more than one student, that each request would be individualized to the student. The same general statements should not be evident within each of the requests. Final approval is on a case-by-case basis. To review, the testing window this year begins on February 24th of 2020 and ends on April 10th of 2020. Math, ELA, and science must occur during this window. The schedule for administering the assessments within this window is again at the discretion of the testing agencies. Schools and service providers should communicate the planned dates for the assessment with parents, as noted earlier, as they would for any student who would also be taking a general assessment. No requests for extensions of the testing window are granted by the vendor. Any request should be directed to the Bureau of Special Education. Typically, extensions are not provided. However, the Bureau of Special Education will review any request and consider extenuating unique circumstance. The Bureau of Special Education uses the term complete test administration cycle when communicating with schools regarding all the components of PASA testing to ensure that a test is valid and reliable. A complete administration cycle for a student consists of 3 steps. 1, it's entering the student response into the system. 2, it's recording and then uploading the performance of the student via the video that was taken. And 3, completing the supporting documentation, which the supporting documentation is the accommodations used. So just like students who take the PSSA and the Keystone exams, and the accommodations are bubbled in on the form, it is expected that the supporting documentation be completed in the system for students on the PASA regarding their accommodations. Again, these three things are not new, but we're just articulating them and making it very clear to those who are participating today. A couple of examples of ways in which scoring and validation could be affected if these things do not all occur is that there could be a situation in which no student responses are submitted, but a video is uploaded. This student can count towards participation, but the student will receive the lowest score in the emerging category. This is like saying the student took the PSSA, but no bubbles are filled in. Example 2, responses are submitted, so A, B, C choices are given, but there's no video that's uploaded. In this case, the student will count towards participation and a score can be generated based upon the student's responses. It is not uncommon for Lisa and I to receive a few inquiries each year where situations such as this occur. So in each of those instances, we communicate with the school PASA AC and work with them to ensure that the best situation is provided and that we can solve the situation at hand. The permission form regarding video recording that is available on the PASA digital site, referenced in PASA training, and to be returned with test kits gives permission for the PASA vendor to use videos for training purposes. Parent permission is not required to video record the assessment. So it is possible that the parent may not grant permission for their child's video to be used in training by not signing, completing, or returning the form. However, the student may still be recorded for purposes of the test. If the parent or guardian requests that their child not be recorded at all, then a request to use narrative notes in lieu of video recording may be requested in these unique situations. The narrative notes request must be made to the Bureau of Special Education using the narrative notes request form. The form must be completed by the PASA AC and submitted to the Bureau of Special Education at least 8 weeks prior to the start of the testing window. The narrative notes request form is located within the PASA digital enrollment system for each student. Approved narrative notes must be documented appropriately in the IEP. Again, use of narrative notes should only be used in unique situations in which the parent has expressed refusal for their child to be video recorded during the assessment. Next, we're going to talk about student score reports. The individual student score reports, or ISSRs, will be provided this year as they have in the past. The PASA vendor will provide the agency who assessed the student with 2 copies of the score report, one as a color copy and one as a black and white copy. The color copy should be provided to the parent and the black and white can be placed in the student's file. The LEA and service provider can also access the student's score report on the PASA digital system and the data downloads, should additional copies be needed. We will clarify at this point, last school year, I believe the vendor only provided the color copy. In years prior to that, the color copy and additional black and white copies were provided. Last year, when score reports were placed onto the digital system, the vendor was hoping that schools would go to the digital system to retrieve the additional report for the student. However, schools and service providers reached out and had requested if we could continue to please just provide that additional one black and white copy. So again, this year, we're returning to that practice of ensuring that one color copy and a black and white copy be provided. And that, as I noted, the color copy be sent home for the family, and that the other copy be placed into the student's file or record. The ISSRs are also available to all LEAs and to the service providers on the Pasa digital system. This year, the vendor has expanded this feature to provide the LEA with score reports for all of their students who reside in the LEA and are attributed to them. Therefore, this means that if you're an LEA and you have students who are serviced outside of the district, you may log into the Pasa digital system onto the LEA service provider reports, and you will see the students, all students for whom you are responsible, regardless of where they're educated. The feature will likely reduce the burden on service providers with providing LEAs a copy of the ISSRs for the students who are receiving services or programs at those institutions, because now all LEAs can access the ISSRs digitally. However, we do recommend that it is good practice to establish a process to ensure that parents do receive the ISSRs. And therefore, please ensure that if you have students as the LEA at locations with the service provider, that you know who indeed is delivering those reports to the parents. I'm sure in many instances this has already been established, but if, for example, you're a new Pasa AC sitting in this role and listening today, we would just encourage you to ensure that you know how that's occurring. One reminder here, and we sometimes get communications from the fields about this, about how information may display on an ISSR. This is important to know that the data will display on the ISSR the way it is entered in the Pasa digital enrollment system. Therefore, if a student's name is typed in correctly, if it was entered into the Pasa digital system as all lowercase, that is how it will display on the ISSR. It is not an error on behalf of the vendor or the department. It is extracting the information that is entered into the digital system. So at this point, I'm going to attempt something which could be technologically tricky as you're working in a Zoom webinar. And I'm going to ask Lisa maybe just to step out and have Michael come in should we need him, or IT person. But I'm actually going to escape out of the PowerPoint for a moment. I'm going to go to Chrome, and I'm going to pull up the digital system. So what I'd like to do here is just simply log in and show you where the digital downloads are. So there will be an additional tab up here where my arrow is pointing during the test administration window. At that point, hold on. I'm seeing, let's see, it's Michael. Oh, yeah, Corey. So I switched over. I'd like to show, I want to make sure, let me do a new share.
Yeah, just share your screen, which will be this one here.
Thank you. Thank you. I saw my numbers going up. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
All right, so there we go. I think that first challenge was overcome. So you should now see I was able to adjust my share. This should look familiar to those of you who are Pasa ACs. There is, as I was saying, an additional tab up here during the test window where it would say, I believe, test or test administration. But the reports that we're talking about, if you're a Pasa AC, would be over here under the admin tab. So I will show you something here. There's two things over here. I will talk about user accounts. So I have a different type of status. I'm identified within the Pasa digital system as a coordinator. And so you'll see here, there are some patent folks who are in the system, because this system is also used when items are reviewed. So if you're a Pasa AC over here under admin, under user accounts, what you will see is this would be those assessors or teachers or whomever is serving in the role that you have for them as testing the kids. So you would be able to see who all is listed, and you might see that you're missing some new people. You might see that you have people in there who are no longer with your agency. So those are all things that can be adjusted for. Now, what we were really talking about prior to coming here with the data downloads, as I had mentioned, this has always been available for the last few years. I don't know how many people actually dig into it and use it. And we are going to actually be adding a little bit more of description associated with each one of these sections. So when you log in at the end of September, the layout may look a little bit different, but everything that you see here will continue to be here under the Data Downloads tab. So for example, when we were talking about student score reports, you would be able, as the Pasa AC, to go here and see your LEA student reports. Because I'm logged in with a different level than what you may be, if you're an LEA, you would be able to go here, and there's nothing loaded at this time because I'm not a school. But you would, if you're a school district or charter school, you'd be able to pull up and see all of your student reports, regardless of where they receive their programming. If you log in and you're an intermediate unit or you're an APS, you're going to see service provider reports, and you're going to see the reports for all the students for whom you tested the year before. We also have additional reports from prior years here. You can also, while I have you here, you can go over here to current accounts and records, similar to what you saw under user accounts. You can click here. And again, the people that you saw noted on that earlier screen, there's a larger screen that comes up here, and it talks about and gives information on them in the system. So you would be able to see if your teachers have completed the training, if they completed enrollment. So as the Pasa AC, you can pretty easily check at one quick login how all of your assessors are doing. This here, the live student enrollment file, this is also important. You heard me talking a little bit about ensuring that if you're a district or a charter school and you have students receiving services at a licensed private school, you have them in an approved private school, maybe they're at an IU program. What you can do here is you can click on that link. You will see all of your LEA students, those that are literally sitting in seats, in classrooms, in buildings in your district. And you should also see those students for whom you are responsible for as an LEA that you would want to see assessed because they're at a service provider location. If you go here and you don't see Johnny listed and Johnny's at a service provider within your community, then you would want to reach out and say, Johnny should be enrolled. Have you enrolled him yet? I don't see him in this file. So this is a way that you can literally keep track of all of your students. Okay. And there's also a section here, we talked a little earlier about test security and ensuring that you have things returned. The vendor is to scan materials and ensure that when they are scanned, that you can look and see all the materials, the test kits, and any downloads that have been returned or not returned. So that's something here for you as well. All right, so with that, okay, I'm going to return to the presentation. I believe, is this back to you, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to turn this over here to Lisa.
Okay.
Let me, there we go.
Thank you, Linda. That was very
Sure.
helpful.
Yeah.
I'll walk through it.
Thank you.
Okay, so just switching gears a little bit. Next, we're going to talk about parent requests pertaining to the PASA. So this slide includes the process for a parent religious opt-out request. If the parent initiates a request for a religious opt-out to a school administrator, the following steps should occur. The PASA AC contacts the PASA vendor to request a secure link of the test for viewing to be sent through the PASA digital system. Please note, do not show the parent a real student test from the system. The assessment that's sent by the vendor for this purpose must be used. The parent must view the assessment on school grounds with a school administrator present and sign the PASA confidentiality agreement form before viewing the test. The test cannot be copied or taken off of school grounds. Service providers should involve the student's home district LEA in these requests. As with the general assessments, if a parent finds the assessment is in conflict with their religious beliefs, the parent must write a letter to the district administrator requesting a religious opt-out. LEAs and service providers should be reminded that there is no federal allowance for excusing a student from participation in state assessments, general or alternate. Students who do not participate based on religious opt-outs will affect the participation rate of the LEA and can have a negative impact on accountability. An IEP team cannot opt out or exempt a student from a statewide assessment participation. The state assessment section, which is section 4 of the IEP document, should be completed for all students, regardless if they are being opted out by their parents for religious reasons or not. This slide pertains to a parent's request to view their own child's individual PASA video recording. So this process is just a little different than the process I explained on the previous slides. If an LEA receives a request from a parent to view their child's actual video, they should contact us at the Bureau of Special Education. We then work collaboratively with the LEA and the vendor moving forward. As with requests to view the test outlined on the previous slides, this process also requires the parent to view their child's video on school grounds with a district administrator present. There is a separate confidentiality form required for this process, and that form is made available to the LEA by the Bureau of Special Education when they make the request. A PASA-related resource was created by the Bureau of Special Education and Patton last school year, designed for parents. It's a brief document to include frequently asked questions pertaining to the PASA. It serves as another resource to IEP teams as they make appropriate determinations regarding a student's participation in the PASA. LEAs may access this resource on the PDE or Patton website. The link is provided on this slide. You may also make a publication request through the Patton website if you would like to order copies or distribute to staff and parents. Next, we will discuss the 1% threshold on alternate assessment participation as it pertains to the state and to local LEAs. And just to point out, when we discuss state assessment participation rates, there are two separate percentages commonly referred to in the federal and state regulations. This slide demonstrates the difference between the 95% participation requirement and the 1% threshold. It is important for LEAs to understand both requirements as they pertain to students with disabilities. So again, the 95% participation rate is the requirement that all students, including those with disabilities, must participate in state assessments, at least 95% of your student population. And that would be regarding the Keystone, PSSA, and PASA collectively to remain in compliance with that 95% participation rate regulation. And the 1% threshold pertains only to students taking the alternate or the PASA. And again, as mentioned earlier, ESSA stipulates no more than 1% of the state's total tested population is allowed to be assessed with an alternate assessment. For purposes of the presentation today, we'll focus on the 1% threshold requirement, also referred to as the 1% cap. States are now using the term threshold instead of cap moving forward, as this has been identified as a more appropriate description. So again, you may have remembered in years past this being referred to as 1% cap. It's now being referred to as 1% threshold. It's really no difference other than just the terminology. Again, coming down from the federal government, and other states have kind of decided that threshold is the more appropriate term. So the 1% regulation is not new. It was a requirement under No Child Left Behind. Participation in the alternate assessment's always been based upon eligibility criteria. Under No Child Left Behind, the number of proficient and advanced scores that could count toward an LEA's accountability was limited to 1%. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, continued to mandate the 1% regulation. However, under ESSA, the guideline pertains to states as a whole, in that states who exceed the 1% can apply to the U.S. Department of Education for a waiver. As stated, the 1% threshold federal requirements have implications for states and for individual LEAs. We'll first discuss the implications at the state level. This slide shows data produced by the National Center on Educational Outcomes, or NCEO. As you will see, Pennsylvania ranks close to one of the highest in the nation regarding percentage rates of students who participate in the state alternate assessment. While many states exceed the 1% threshold, PA has assessed approximately 2% of students for the last couple of school years. Pennsylvania applied to the U.S. Department of Education for a waiver in the 2017-18 school year based upon the previous year's participation rates. The waiver was denied based on the state's failure to meet the 95% participation rate for all students with disabilities participating in statewide assessments. Again, I'll refer back to the slide a few slides ago that outlined the two different percentages we talk about. In order for a state to even apply for the 1% waiver, they must be able to show that they meet the 95% participation requirement. And again, that's a federal regulation. PA was not able to apply last year despite exceeding the 1% threshold again. Again, PA did not meet the overall participation requirement, or that 95% participation requirement, in order to even apply for the waiver last year. As mentioned, PA continued to exceed the threshold last year at a rate of approximately 2% in all tested subjects and did not receive a waiver. Therefore, PDE received a letter from the U.S. Department of Education in June notifying of implications for not meeting the requirement. The letter required the state to submit a plan of action of how the state will decrease PASA participation rates. The 1% compliance action plan was submitted to the U.S. Department of Education in August of this year. The state's action plan includes the following. It's updating the LEA justification requirements, which we will review in the presentation today. Mandated public reporting of the 1% justification information, which is new, and again, we will cover that. Continuation of the intensive needs review process. An additional focus on eligibility determinations for students in disability categories that are not typically associated with the PASA, such as learning disabled, emotionally disturbed, and speech only. The state's overall plan includes updates and continued efforts to address the 1% at the state and LEA level. Now we will discuss the implications for LEAs. The requirement for LEAs to submit a justification for exceeding the 1% is not new. However, the 1% threshold justification document has been updated, and the process for submission to BSC is new for the 2019-20 school year. A Penn link was released on September 9th to inform the field of the new requirements. The updates are outlined on the following slides. The link on this slide provides access to the updated 1% threshold LEA justification form on the PDE site. The form also includes the instructions for the new submission process. The due date for LEAs to submit their justification to the Bureau of Special Education is October 15th this year. And again, I highlight that date because that date is, please note, that's earlier than in years past. The new due date coincides with the Pasa enrollment this year and also allows for the public posting requirement. LEAs are reminded to include all students who reside in the LEA in the calculation, including any students that the LEA may have placed with outside service providers or other educational entities. This includes IU programs. So the calculation process is not new. However, this slide provides a review of how to appropriately calculate the 1%. Oftentimes when folks are working on their justifications, Linda and I receive emails and calls from the field just to kind of clarify how the calculation should be done. So the purpose of this slide is to help walk you through that process. It's important to include all students who are attributed to your LEA for accountability purposes when looking at this calculation. As mentioned, the Pasa digital system has a live student enrollment feature in which the assessment coordinator can access student enrollment information for students that they educate not only within their district or LEA, but any students they may have placed with outside service providers. So this will be helpful in obtaining the correct number for the numerator. LEAs can consult their PIMS information to obtain the denominator. It is understood that these numbers may change as the year progresses. However, this calculation is intended to provide an estimation of where the LEA may be in relation to the 1% threshold. If LEAs question which students to include in the calculation, the rule of thumb would be to include any student for which you are the home LEA or district of residence, and that would be for the numerator and denominator. The directions for the calculation are spelled out within the justification document and on this slide. For example, if the LEA has 2 students taking the Pasa and 450 total students enrolled in the tested grade levels, the calculation would yield a percentage of 0.4%. LEAs may round their percentage to one number after the decimal point. As noted previously, the justification submission process this year has been revised. The LEA must follow and complete 2 steps. It is recommended to complete the steps in the order identified. First, the LEA completes the justification form located on the website and obtains the necessary signatures. This completed and signed form should be maintained in the district. The form itself does not need to be emailed to BSE as in years past. The second step of the process is the new submission survey. The purpose for using an electronic submission is to provide the ability of the BSE to extract and analyze data. The SurveyMonkey address is embedded on the form. The survey contains the same information as the form, thus making completion simple. It is recommended to have the form available when completing the online survey. Also note the survey must be completed in its entirety. Responses will not save if completed in segments. So again, it makes most sense to complete your hard copy form, have that with you when you go in to enter the survey, and all you're doing is inserting your results in the survey. Again, the survey submission serves as the LEA's official submission to BSE. Upon completion of the survey, the LEA will receive a receipt message. It is recommended to save or print this receipt message for your records. Again, the purpose of the online survey is for the BSE to be able to analyze data more readily and to comply with the requirements of the state's plan of action. And reminder again, it's not necessary to email your justification document to us this year as you have done in years past. The survey submission replaces this requirement. Also new this year, ESSA requires public posting of LEAs who anticipate exceeding the threshold. While this is not new under ESSA, it is the first year that the BSE will be implementing this. PDE will post the list of LEAs who anticipate exceeding the threshold on the PDE website. Likely that will be sometime in November or December after all the submissions have been completed by October 15th. LEAs are required to make their justification information publicly available upon request, ensuring no personally identifiable information is shared. The LEA may determine how they will make their justification information publicly available. LEAs may include their justification document on the district webpage and ensure the appropriate point of contact is identified for questions. The drop-down menus in the form were provided this year to help guide LEAs in their responses. Next, the PASA Intensive Needs Review process will be reviewed. This is not new as this process began last school year. States exceeding the 1% participation threshold are required to demonstrate oversight of LEAs exceeding the participation rate. The Intensive Needs Review was created as a means to provide additional monitoring and oversight of LEAs who exceed the threshold by excessive participation rates. LEAs are identified based upon their participation rates as an intensive needs status by the Bureau of Special Education on an annual basis. LEAs who are identified are required to complete the Intensive Needs Review process. BSE provides formal written notification to the identified LEAs with instructions on the process. The criterion used to identify an LEA as an Intensive Needs Review LEA status is as follows. The LEA exceeded the 1% threshold in the 2017-18 testing cycle. They then exceeded the 1% threshold again in the 2018-19 testing cycle by 4% or more. And the LEA has an N size of at least 100 total students in the tested population. So in other words, they have at least 100 students in grades 3 through 8 and 11 total population. LEAs are currently being identified by BSE this year to complete the Intensive Needs Review process. The process includes mandatory completion of the Intensive Needs Review or INR data protocol form and submission of at least 2 IEPs to the Bureau of Special Education. Again, BSE representatives will be in touch with any identified LEA to communicate the steps of the process and outline due dates for this year. All other LEAs who exceed the threshold are encouraged to use the INR or Intensive Needs Review data protocol form as a tool to analyze PASA participation data within the LEA. Again, it is not necessary to submit this form to the BSE unless you are identified as intensive needs status. The 2020 Intensive Needs Review or INR data protocol form can be accessed on the PDE website under the 1% threshold link. The updated form will be available soon. So you'll see when you go on that link, you'll see it's coming soon. The LEAs who will be required by BSE to complete the Intensive Needs Review process for 2019-20 have not yet been identified, and its final participation numbers from 2019 are still being solidified by PDE. As mentioned, any LEA who has identified this year will be contacted directly by BSE and notified in writing of the requirements and due dates. To review, we've discussed 2 separate requirements for LEAs pertaining to the 1% threshold. And just as a side note, if you check out the PDE website, there is under special education assessments, under the assessment page, which some of these links within the slides take you to, there is now a 1% link there that's going to take you to the justification and intensive needs review. So the 1% justification is required for all LEAs who anticipate exceeding the 1% threshold for the upcoming 2020 testing cycle. As discussed on previous slides, this information must be made publicly available by the state and LEAs starting this year. The other requirement we reviewed was the intensive needs review. This is a more in-depth process designed to analyze LEA participation rates. It is only required for LEAs who are identified as intensive needs status by the Bureau of Special Education. All others who exceed the threshold are encouraged to use the Intensive Needs Review Data Protocol as a tool to review their own participation data. So before we move into questions and answers, I see we have, it looks like about 34 questions that were submitted. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. I do want to announce that the PASA project has moved. So their new mailing address is on this slide. Their phone number, fax number, and email has stayed the same. So if you've contacted PASA in the past, rest assured all that information stayed the same, but they do have a new mailing address. And again, this will be on their website as well. I also want to show Linda and I our contact information. We work with a lot of you through the school year, and certainly as we announced at the beginning of the presentation, we're going to try to get to the questions in the chat box here in a few minutes. If for some reason we don't get to your question, or you have something that you really didn't want to announce to the entire group today, you can certainly email us at any time throughout the school year, and we'll be happy to assist you. So we are going to, at this time, we're going to mute ourselves and give you all just a few minutes of a break so we can go through the questions. Allow folks sitting in the live webinar today to take a stretch and take a break. So let's say in 10 minutes, five minutes, Linda's giving me the 5. In 5 minutes, we will return and address the questions in the chat box.
Yeah. And just before we mute, for anyone who joined later and missed the very beginning, and as the chat box expands as time goes on, there is a link at the very, very start of the chat box that you should be able to click upon, and that should take you to the PowerPoint. We will have the PowerPoint posted along with this recorded webinar in approximately 7 to 10 days. But that being said, for those of you who are joining us and missed that early announcement or missed the link in the chat box, the PowerPoint is available to you now. Okay, now we'll take a 5. We'll say 5 to 7 minutes. Okay, thank you.